Hello, dear friends. It's been a while since I've spoken at this contemplative lab session on world scripture. Today, I'd like to continue sharing in a meditative way one particular text that I like very much. Today, I've chosen a text from the Tibetan tradition. And this particular one is written by a 19th century Dzogchen master by the name of Dudjom Lingpa. My own training in Dzogchen was in this particular lineage of Dudjom Lingpa. So this text written by Dudjom Lingpa is called Buddhahood without meditation, better known by its subtitle, Refining One's Perception, or Nanjang. I'll read the passage that I've selected and then proceed to talk about it in terms of one's meditative inquiry and experience. So Nanjang, or Buddhahood without meditation, is quite a long text. However, I have selected only a few lines, less than a paragraph actually, from one of the chapters of Buddhahood without meditation. And in this particular paragraph, Dudjom Lingpa is speaking about the nature of the mind or awareness, and also the nature of our experience. So listen to this. This empty space is the ground for the arising of the entire universe. For example, it's like a mirror being the ground for the rising of a reflection, which has never existed as anything other than the mirror. It's like water being the ground for the arising of the moon's image, which has never existed as anything other than water. And it is like the sky being the ground for the arising of a rainbow, which has never existed as anything other than sky. So in this text called Buddhahood without meditation, Dudjom Lingpa is writing about his visionary experience with a number of so-called enlightened beings. And so in these visionary encounters, Dudjom Lingpa had purported conversations or dialogues with these beings, and then he proceeded to give an account of what these various enlightened beings shared with him. And as they shared, he writes this down in the form of a text. So each chapter, if you like, consists of a conversation with a particular enlightened being. Now here, Dudjom Lingpa is writing about something quite profound. He's writing about the nature of our experience of all things and of the world. He speaks about how everything that we experience is born out of our awareness, our consciousness, that is in essence not separate from the world or the phenomena that we experience. Now, when we read this verse or these few lines, it's possible to come to the conclusion that Dudjom Lingpa is espousing an idealist point of view. When we say idealist point of view, we are talking about the philosophical idea that everything that exists is none other than mind, Everything that exists is mentally created or projected, and that there's nothing else that exists apart from the substance that we call mind or mind substance. Now, while this might be a possible interpretation of Dudjom Lingpa's account, I do not think that is what he meant by it. I think there's another way to read this passage, not so much in terms of what truly exists, but in terms of what is experienced. And as far as experience is concerned, we cannot talk about anything outside that experience apart from the experience itself. Whatever lies outside experience is not accessible to experience, so to speak. What is experienced is what is experienced. So if one experiences this or that, this particular entity or that particular situation or the world, we can only talk about the experience of this or that. We cannot talk about whether this or that truly exists outside that experience because we don't know. But what we do know is what we know in our experience. So as Dudjom Lingpa says, this empty space is the ground for the arising of the entire universe. This empty space referring to the space of our consciousness, of our minds, of our awareness. And this is the space, it's not an actual physical space, but it's metaphorically speaking like space, wherein our entire universe of experience arises. So this empty space is the ground for the arising of the entire universe that we experience, the arising of our experienced world. For example, as Dudjom Lingpa continues, it's like a mirror being the ground for the arising of a reflection. So the reflection that appears on the mirror is what is experienced and is never experienced as anything other than the mirror. It's never experienced as anything other than that mirror of experience itself, right? Say, for example, we experience a flower. So our consciousness is like the mirror experiencing the flower. So what is true and what is valid is that there is a flower appearing in the mirror of consciousness in our experience. There's a flower that is experienced. There's an experienced flower, right? But when we examine this experienced flower, there's nothing other than the experienced flower itself. There is no way we can say that there is something other than the experienced flower, that there's truly and inherently an objective flower existing apart from that experience, because the experience is all there is. Now, what we are not saying is that there is no such flower existing outside experience. We're not saying that, because we cannot really say whether the flower exists outside the experience or not. It is not something we can experience directly, but it's something we can infer. We can infer and we can think, we can project the existence of this flower outside experience, or we can project the non-existence of this flower outside experience. But all that we can say about a flower that is experienced is the flower that is experienced, the experiencing itself. So Dudjom Lingpa goes on to say, it's like water being the ground for the arising of the moon's image, which has never existed as anything other than water. Similarly, the moon that's a reflection, the moon that's reflected on water, is not separate from the water. If you try and stir the water to find the moon, you cannot find it because the moon that is reflected on the water is of one substance as the water. Okay? And it's like the sky, as Dudjom Lingpa says, like the sky being the ground for the arising of a rainbow, which has never existed as anything other than the sky. The rainbow appearing in the sky does not exist inherently apart from the sky. Have you ever seen a rainbow without a sky? No. So the rainbow is, in the Tibetan imagination, part of the sky, just as the reflected moon is part of the water that reflects it. So in this way, Dudjom Lingpa skillfully guides us through these analogies and metaphors to the experiencing element in our experience. Whether it be a flower, whether it be the moon, whether it be the rainbow, all that appears in experience can be called appearances. And we can say definitively about such appearances, but we cannot say definitively about whether such experiences exist as they appear. They appear, and their appearance is real and valid, but whether they exist outside that appearance is beyond our verbalization, perhaps even beyond our actual immediate knowledge. But what is immediate in our knowledge is the knowing of the flower, the moon, the rainbow, the appearances themselves being experienced, known, cognized. And the only thing that we can say about this cognition, this cognizance, this knowing, this awareness is the awareing itself, the knowing itself. Because this knowing can never be known or grasped as an object. But this knowing is naturally self-illumining and self-knowing. Is there anything other than the experiencing in the experience? No. Is there anything other than the knowing in the knowledge of appearances? No. In the knowledge of appearances, be it a flower, a moon, or a rainbow, is only the knowing itself, the knowing element within the knowledge of appearances. And the only thing that can be said about this knowing is knowing. Knowing in knowing. Knowingly knowing. Nothing else can be said apart from that. And this knowingly knowing element, if you like, is like empty space. It's nothing whatsoever, and yet it can be anything, anything at all. Appearances can manifest without hindrance, and there's no limit to the number of appearances that appear. And there's nothing that can touch or taint this knowing. But it's not a thing, because if it's a thing, it will be liable to destruction, liable to pollution, liable to degeneration. But it's more a quality than it is a thing. A quality of knowing that is unassailable in any way. So as we come to recognize this unassailable knowing element that is not a thing but a quality, we can inquire deeper to ask ourselves, how does this knowing arise? What is the source of this knowing? While the thought and the question is based on the presumption of causality, as if there is a before and after, the after being the result of consciousness itself, and the before being the cause of that consciousness. When we ask this question, the questioning itself presumes causality, yet it is not wrong or invalid to ask such a question. The reality might be way beyond simple causation as conceived by our limited minds. But it is still possible to ponder the mystery without necessarily coming to a logical answer as to the source of such a knowing element that seems to be the very ground of our being. Is it not possible that this ground of being has its source in the infinite, immeasurable, ineffable being, or what we would call God Himself? Completely beyond our ken, completely beyond our horizon, completely beyond our ability to grasp, whether conceptually or experientially, but yet nevertheless existing absolutely, immutably, indestructibly, and infinitely. And our own ground of being that we call our empty space of awareness is none other than a microcosmic reflection of His infinite aware being. Because our own aware being is a reflection of that infinitude, we feel as if when immersed in this aware being that is us, we are infinite. Because our aware being partakes in the same quality of infinity as infinite being Himself, which is the reason why we can somehow mistakenly assume our experience of pure infinite awareness as the be-all and end-all of our inner life. But that would be a premature conclusion. Be that as it may, the principle of all that we can find or discover about the appearances of things is the experiencing of these appearances only. And all that we can find in the experiencing is the experiencing element itself, nothing else. The flower, the moon, the rainbow, all non-separate from the mere experiencing of them. So, dear friends, let me conclude by rereading that few lines from Dudjom Lingpa, Buddhahood without meditation. This empty space, the ground for the arising of the entire universe. For example, it's like a mirror being the ground for the arising of a reflection, which has never existed as anything other than a mirror. It's like water being the ground for the arising of the moon's image, which has never existed as anything other than water. And it's like the sky, being the ground for the arising of a rainbow, which has never existed as anything other than the sky. So, dear friends, I hope that these reflections have been helpful to you in your own inquiry, your own journey into the depths of your true nature, to touch a measure of that clarity and peace and freedom that is available to you in the very ground of your being. That ground of being that is a mere reflection of the infinite, ineffable being of God. So thank you for being so attentive and patient. Till next time, Namaskar, Shalom, Om Shanti.